The second she stepped through that curtain, everything changed. It wasn't just a return. It was a rupture in reality. For 5 long years, her name had been a whisper, a what if, a ghost story told by veterans to rookies. She was the standard they couldn't reach, the legacy that defined an era and then vanished, leaving only questions and a void that was never truly filled. The arena lights had dimmed, a segment was ending, and the crowd was catching its breath. Then the static hit. A familiar, agonizing electronic screech, followed by 3 notes of a song nobody thought they would ever hear live again. A collective gasp swept through the 20,000 people in attendance. It was a sound of disbelief, a sharp intake of air so sudden it was almost silent. Then the silhouette appeared, backlit by blinding white, shrouded in smoke, unmistakable. The silence broke. It didn't just break, it detonated. The sound was not a cheer. It was a roar of primal, delayed catharsis. People were grabbing their heads, strangers were hugging, grown men were instantly in tears. This wasn't planned, this wasn't rumored, this wasn't supposed to happen. The fans screamed, the commentary team went speechless. This is the moment that reminded us why we love SmackDown. She hadn't moved. She just stood there, letting the noise wash over her, a ghost returning to the world of the living. The camera panned across the front row, capturing faces of pure, unadulterated shock. The narrative of the entire company, the hierarchy of the division, the plans for the biggest show of the year, all of it, became obsolete in the 3 seconds it took for her to walk onto the ramp. In the chaotic world of live television, silence is the enemy. But for a full 12 seconds, the commentary team offered nothing. The lead announcer, a man who had called hundreds of history-making moments, had thrown his headset down onto the desk, his hands clasped over his mouth. His partner, usually the voice of cynical reason, was simply staring, wide-eyed, his jaw slack. When the lead announcer finally found his voice, it wasn't a triumphant call. It was a strained, cracked whisper. It can't be. But the real story was in the ring. Awaiting a different opponent, a young, confident superstar who had been making her name in the main event scene, stood frozen. The arrogance she had walked in with had evaporated. We were watching her realize in real time that her match was not going to happen. We were watching her realize that her entire career trajectory had just hit a brick wall. The spotlight that was supposed to be hers was now illuminating the figure on the ramp. The camera zoomed in tight on the superstar's face. It wasn't just shock, it was fear. She wasn't looking at a competitor. She was looking at the woman whose posters were on her wall as a teenager, the icon she had studied, the legend she had been told she could one day replace. And now, the legend was here, and she looked anything but retired. The returning figure, Ilara, finally lowered her head and began the slow, deliberate walk to the ring. The arena wasn't cheering anymore. They were chanting her name, and the woman in the ring could do nothing but watch her world crumble. Backstage, just behind the curtain, is a place of controlled chaos known as the gorilla position. It's the nerve center, where producers and executives watch the show, call camera cuts, and manage time. When Ilara's music hit, that control vanished. The lead producer, a man who prided himself on never being surprised, dropped his clipboard. The scripts in his hand scattered across the floor. "Who called that?" he yelled into his headset. "Whose music is that?" The audio technician, terrified, could only stammer, It just played, sir. This wasn't on the format sheet. This wasn't a company-approved surprise." The head of creative was seen pacing in small, frantic circles, his face pale. This was a breach. How did she get in the building? Who cleared her? Security was scrambling, but it was too late. 20,000 people were screaming her name. The network feed was live. "You cannot unring this bell." The producer, recognizing the futility, took a deep breath. He picked up his headset, his voice now cold and professional. "Forget the segment. Forget the commercial break. All cameras on her. Follow her. Do not cut away. Whatever she does, we roll with it." In that moment, the power structure of the entire promotion inverted. The script was gone. The plan was dead. The producers were no longer directing the show. Ilara was. She had hijacked a billion-dollar broadcast simply by showing up. And as she stepped through the ropes, the realization hit everyone backstage. She wasn't just back, she was in charge. In the women's locker room, the monitors showing the live feed are usually just background noise. Women taping their wrists, stretching, talking strategy. When the static hit, the room fell silent. The veterans, the ones who had shared this space with Ilara 5 years ago, instinctively stood up. They knew the sound. They knew the silhouette. Some looked relieved, as if the true north had finally returned. Others looked haunted, remembering the impossible standard she set, the brutal training, the shadow she cast. The younger generation, those who had risen in her absence, watched with a different emotion. It was a mix of awe and deep, profound resentment. They had fought to build this division, to move it past her ghost. And with one entrance, she had rendered their work invisible. And then there was the champion, Serafina. She was in her private dressing room, lacing her boots for the main event. She watched the monitor, her face betraying nothing. She didn't cheer. She didn't gasp. She just watched Ilara soak in the adoration. Slowly, deliberately, Serafina tightened the laces on her boots until her knuckles turned white. She looked at the championship title sitting beside her. It was the prize she had bled for, the pinnacle of her life's work. And in an instant, it had just become a prop in someone else's story. The ghost was back, and she was coming for the throne. The second her face was confirmed on television, the internet buckled. It wasn't just a trend, it was a denial-of-service attack on global conversation. The platform, formerly known as Twitter, didn't just see a spike, it saw a vertical line. "She's back," and Ilara occupied the top 2 spots worldwide, surpassing global news, politics, and wars. It was, for a few hours, the only thing that mattered. But it was the type of reaction that was so telling. It wasn't just, wow. It was raw, emotional data. "I'm shaking. I never thought I'd see her again. My kid is asking me why I'm crying at the TV. The division is on notice. The queen is home." Old gifs of her most famous matches began to circulate. Grainy, low-resolution clips of a bygone era, suddenly looking fresh and vital. The narrative began to spin, instantly and violently. Was she back for the champion, Serafina? Was she back to avenge the injury that forced her out? Was she back to retire the right way? Every wrestling journalist, every podcaster, every reaction channel immediately went live, tearing up their planned content. The machine, hungry for 5 years, was finally being fed. The woman herself hadn't said a word. She hadn't thrown a punch. She had simply walked out. But in doing so, she had become the biggest story in sports, and the speculation was now a fire burning completely out of control. The show ended. The cameras stopped rolling. Ilara was nowhere to be seen. She had walked to the ring, soaked in the cheers, and as the show faded to black, she had slipped out a side door and vanished. Backstage, the press and media teams were in full-blown panic. They had a post-show press conference scheduled for the champion, Serafina. It was now, clearly, an Ilara press conference. Except Ilara wasn't there. The company's official social media account posted a single, stark image of her on the ramp with 2 words. "She's back." It garnered 1 million likes in 10 minutes. Journalists, desperate for an angle, started digging. They didn't just call the WWE press office, they called her old training partners. They called her family. Her sister, a high school teacher in Oregon, suddenly had her phone vibrating off the table. Her father, long retired, had local news vans parked outside his quiet suburban home by dawn. They were being pulled back into the vortex they had escaped 5 years prior. The company, realizing it had lost control of the narrative, did the only thing it could. It announced Alara would speak, live, on the following week's show. They hadn't asked her. They hadn't cleared it. They simply announced it. A desperate attempt to put a leash on the dragon they had, willingly or not, unleashed. The entire week was defined by agonizing anticipation. When SmackDown went live, the ratings were the highest they had been in a decade. The show opened not with pyro or music, but with Alara, already in the ring, sitting on a single steel chair. She wore no merchandise, no Obsidian Queen gear. She was just in a black hoodie, her face pale. The crowd was electric, but she held up a hand, asking for silence. And she got it. You could hear a pin drop. The interviewer in the ring with her asked the only question that mattered. "Alara, why?" She looked down at the microphone for a long time. The arena held its breath. "When I left," she began, her voice quiet, almost hoarse, "I told you it was because of my knee. That was true. What I didn't tell you was what the injury really meant." She spoke not of the pain of the surgery, but of the silence that followed. The silence of an empty apartment. The silence of no longer having a purpose. "You all," she said, motioning to the crowd, "remember the legacy. You remember the wins. You remember the champion." She paused, her voice thickening. "I remember the cost. I remember the physical therapy. I remember learning to walk again and being told I would never, ever run." She said she hadn't come back to reclaim a throne. She said she hadn't come back for the champion. "I came back," she said, looking straight into the camera, "to see if the woman you all remember still exists at all." Later that night, Alara was in the trainer's room, getting her knee iced. The door opened. It was the champion, Serafina. She wasn't in her ring gear. She was in street clothes, her championship title slung over her shoulder. She didn't knock. She just stood in the doorway. "That was a nice speech," Serafina said, her voice dripping with acid. "Very heartfelt. The whole world is crying for you." Alara just looked at her, saying nothing. Serafina stepped into the room. "But you and I know what this is. You can't stand it, can you? You can't stand that the show went on without you, that I went on without you." Alara slowly sat up. "This has nothing to do with you, Serafina." "It has everything to do with me," Serafina snapped, pointing at the title. "This is mine. I earned it. I was here, night after night, while you were finding yourself. You don't get to walk back in and claim the spotlight." Alara stood, facing the champion. They were nose to nose. The tension was suffocating. "You think I came back for a piece of gold?" Alara whispered. "You think, after 5 years of hell, that is what brought me back?" Serafina held her ground. "Then what? What could possibly be more important than this?" Alara looked past her, a deep, profound sadness in her eyes. "A promise," she said. "I came back to keep a promise, and you, or that title, will not get in my way." The main event of the evening was set. The champion, Serafina, was defending her title. But before the match, Alara's music hit again. This time, she didn't walk to the ring. She walked out onto the ramp, a microphone in her hand, and motioned for the music to be cut. "Serafina," she called out, her voice echoing through the arena. "You wanted to know why I'm back. You deserve the truth. The WWE Universe deserves the truth." The champion stared her down from the ring. "When I was forced to retire," Alara said, "I didn't go through it alone. There was someone with me. My partner, my strength. He was sick." The entire atmosphere in the arena changed. The boos for Alara interrupting the match died instantly. "He was the one who got me through the surgeries. He was the one who held me when I was told I'd never wrestle again. And he didn't make it. He passed away 4 months ago." A heavy, mournful silence fell over the crowd. "Before he died," Alara continued, tears now streaming down her face, "he made me promise him 2 things. First, that I would heal, that I would live. I kept that promise." She paused, trying to compose herself. "The second promise was that if I ever felt strong enough, I would come back. Not for a title, not for glory. She then pointed, not at the champion, not at the WrestleMania sign. She pointed to the front row. The camera followed her finger, landing on a young girl in a wheelchair holding a sign. He made me promise. I would have one last match. For her, his little sister. My promise was to her. In that instant, everything shifted. The return, the media chaos, the locker room tension, the champion's paranoia, it was all recontextualized. This wasn't a story about a power struggle. It was a story about grief and a vow. The champion, Serafina, stood in the ring, her hard facade completely broken. She looked at the little girl in the front row, then back at Alara. The anger in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dawning, complex understanding. The camera cut to the commentary team. They were silent again, but this time it was from the weight of the moment. We all thought the moment that reminded us why we love SmackDown was the pop, the shock, the return of the Obsidian Queen. We were all wrong. The real moment was this: the revelation that the larger-than-life spectacle was, at its core, a deeply human story. Ilara's return wasn't about reclaiming her legacy. It was about fulfilling his. The noise of her entrance was deafening, but the reason for it was quiet, personal, and devastating. The champion, slowly, deliberately, walked out of the ring. She approached Ilara on the ramp. She didn't attack her, she didn't yell. She looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. She stepped aside, clearing the path. Ilara walked past her, down to the front row, and knelt, hugging the young girl. The legacy wasn't the gold, it was the promise.